So, out of the blue, a single social media post from President Donald Trump seems to have just flipped a switch on decades of U.S. nuclear policy. We're talking about a move that could end a long pause on nuclear weapons testing.
And here it is. This is the post on Truth Social that got everyone talking. The president says he's directed the Department of War to start testing nuclear weapons again, and he's pointing the finger at other countries' testing programs as the reason why. The language is incredibly direct, and boy, the implications are just massive.
To really let that sink in, just think about this number: 33 years. For 33 years, the United States hasn't conducted a single explosive nuclear weapons test. So yeah, this one post signals a huge, abrupt end to more than 3 decades of policy.
What's wild is how this all came out. This wasn't some formal address from the Oval Office or a big press conference. Nope, it was a social media post that left nuclear weapons experts completely baffled and sent some serious shockwaves around the world. And get this, the timing here is pretty remarkable. The post went live right as Trump was heading into a really anticipated, high-stakes meeting with China's President Xi Jinping. A reporter even shouted a question about it as their meeting started, and he just ignored it. So to understand just how big of a deal this is, we really need to take a quick look back at the history of this 33-year pause. This period of, silence wasn't an accident. It was the result of very deliberate policy choices and international agreements. It all really kicks off back in 1992, when President George H.W. Bush put a moratorium on nuclear detonations. Then, in 1996, the U.S. signed the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Now, the Senate never actually ratified it, but we still played by the rules. Fast forward to 2023, and things started to shift when Russia pulled its ratification. And, well, that brings us right up to today's announcement. At the very heart of this whole global norm against testing is this treaty, the CTBT. It was adopted in '96, and its goal is pretty simple: to ban any and all nuclear explosions on the entire planet. And like I said, even though the U.S. never officially ratified it, we've honored it for decades. But here's the thing. The president's post was, let's say, a little light on the details, and that has created this huge ambiguity. So now you've got experts all over the place scrambling to figure out what his order actually means. This is really the crucial question, isn't it? When he says testing, does he mean detonating a full-scale nuclear bomb for the first time since 1992? Or could it possibly mean something else entirely?
Well, it turns out testing can mean a few different things. First, you've got your explosive detonation. That's the big one, a full-scale nuclear blast, which, again, the U.S. has not done since 1992. Then there are low-yield tests. Think very small nuclear explosions, much harder to detect, that countries might use to check on their weapons. Some experts think Russia and China might already be doing these. And finally, there are platform tests. These are actually non-nuclear. It's when you test the delivery system, like a missile, without a warhead on it. And those, they happen all the time. The U.S. tested a Minuteman III missile just last May.
So with all this uncertainty, experts in non-proliferation are weighing in, and they're looking at the potential consequences. And depending on what testing actually means here, the risks could range from just some diplomatic awkwardness to a full-blown international crisis. One of the leading experts, Daryl Kimball from the Arms Control Association, is warning about a pretty dangerous domino effect. He's arguing that if the U.S. resumes explosive tests, it would 1. Trigger major public opposition, 2. Alienate our allies, and 3. Almost certainly push our adversaries to start their own testing. It would just set off this huge chain reaction. And Kimball's warning gets even more stark. He says there's no technical or military reason for the U.S. to go back to testing, and that doing so could, in his exact words, blow apart the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And that treaty is basically the cornerstone of all global efforts to stop the spread of nukes. But, okay, there is another theory floating around. Andrea Stricker, from the Foundation for Defensive Democracies, she's suggesting this might not actually be about blowing things up. She thinks it could be a really high-stakes negotiating tactic, a way to put pressure on Russia and China to get them to the table for new arms control talks, especially before the last treaty we have expires in 2026.
So that leaves us with 2 completely different ways to look at this announcement. And for now, pretty much the whole world is just watching and waiting to get some real clarity.
As of right now, that clarity has not arrived. We've heard nothing from the White House, nothing from the Pentagon. They're both staying silent, which is leaving everyone, from our friends to our rivals, in a total state of uncertainty. Which brings us right back to the central question that's just hanging over this entire situation. Is this a calculated, strategic move to force some kind of diplomatic deal, or are we watching the first step toward tearing down decades of work on non-proliferation and kicking off a really dangerous new arms race? Right now, nobody knows for sure.